I am Bridget Hurley. I'm the Chief Program Officer at the Children's Agenda, and I want to again welcome all of you and thank you for attending tonight. Really thrilled with the level of interest that that we've been experiencing with this training. So a couple of just sort of preliminary comments. First, the purpose of this training is to share information about effective ways to communicate with legislators and effective ways to advocate with others in our community and across the state, all with the goal of making a difference for children. If you don't know, the Children's Agenda is a nonprofit advocacy organization. I'll read our mission statement when we get to the next slide or when we get a couple minutes from now, but we are focused on systems level advocacy, changing policies, funding, and regulations in the public sector. We always work with others because what we want to do is gather power. And some people don't like that word and are a little bit turned off or intimidated by it, but it's really the heart of what we do. And we just want to make sure that the right people have the power. So we are focused on change in the local area and across the state to improve children's lives. I'm gonna dive in right now. I just wanted to also say there are many different levels of knowledge of advocacy. I can already tell on this screen. And so I'm going to provide some pretty broad information, as is my colleague, Eamon Scanlon. But again, we'll have time for questions so we can dig into some details if that's an interest of yours. Just feel free to ask questions when we get to the Q&A. All right, so advocacy campaign goals. So we all know there's different levels of advocacy, right? So there's one-to-one advocacy where someone is perhaps standing up for someone in a courtroom, or you're assisting a family who's trying to access services, or a child who has some special needs in a school setting. So there's one-on-one advocacy. There's advocacy on behalf of others. So that would be like a lobbyist who meets with legislators and says, you know, I'm representing this industry or this group of people. And then there's advocacy with people. And that is what the Children's Agenda is all about. And it's why we're so thrilled that there are so many of you with us tonight, because we want to advocate for children and families, and we want to do that alongside the children and families who are experiencing the problems that we are concerned about. So as I said, the Children's Agenda mission statement is the Children's Agenda advocates for effective policies and drives evidence-based solutions for the health, education, and success of children. And we are especially concerned about children who are vulnerable because of trauma, racism, poverty, or health inequities. So that's what we're all about. And we're happy to, again, see all the folks on the screen who are interested as well. So we work not just with children and families, so we work with other advocacy groups all over New York State. And when we all join together, we call that a campaign. It's not an electoral campaign, it's an issue-based campaign. And so again, the purpose is to change laws, money, or policies for families. And we just have a couple examples up on the screen of campaign goals. So you might be familiar with our Kids Can't Wait campaign, where we're trying to increase access to services for young children with disabilities or delays. And the purpose of that campaign, or an example of a campaign goal, would be that to increase early intervention providers' reimbursement rates. And we also work very much in childcare with the Empire State Campaign for Childcare. There's a very big push right now to increase workforce compensation because childcare workers are among the lowest paid workers, not just lowest paid professionals, but lowest paid workers in our economy. And so, and there's a tremendous shortage of childcare workers. So we're trying to increase compensation. And then thirdly, in our suspensions not solutions not suspensions campaign, we're trying to eliminate exclusionary discipline where pre-K children are kicked out of classrooms because of behavior that really should be met with guidance and support. And so we're trying to eliminate the option of suspensions. So next slide. So we're going to talk tonight primarily about state level advocacy. And the reason why we are engaging so much in state level advocacy and traveling to Albany several times, you'll hear about that a little bit later, is because there's so much policy that's made at the state level that even impacts us locally. So New York State has an unusual structure in that there's a lot of policy and funding that happens at the state level that is then implemented at the local level. So for example, the child care subsidy program or a foster care program or juvenile justice programs. And so it's really important for us to work at both levels, and particularly at this time of year to work in Albany. The governor is there, the legislature meets there. That's where all of the major agencies are that impact children and family services, like the Department of Education, the Department of Health. And then finally, because we're always trying to build more support for our advocacy, the Albany press is very focused on politics and on advocacy and on public policy decision-making. And so if we go to Albany and get a story in their paper, it's often read by people all over the state. So that's why we're talking primarily tonight about going to Albany. So next slide. So here's just some basic facts for folks who are not familiar with the New York State Legislature. The legislature is actually considered part-time. They're in session from January through June. And the first 3 months of the session, January through April 1st, are considered the budget session. And that's where budget decisions are made. And then the budget is supposed to pass by April 1st, which it normally does now. Anyone who's my age knows that it used to sometimes go into the summer before it passed. But for the past few years, the budget has passed right around April 1st. And that's the beginning of the state fiscal year. So any budgetary item is impacting the state beginning in April and then through the end of the following March. From April 1st through the end of June or mid-June or so, there's non-budgetary matters that are considered and passed by the legislature. So those are things that don't have dollar amounts attached to them. That is not hard and fast. You'll find out as you get more involved, if you're not already, that sometimes there are things that are passed in May that have to do with the budget. But for the most part, first January through March is the state budget, and then April through June are more programmatic bills and policy bills. So in New York State, we have two houses of our legislature, the Assembly and the Senate. So all of us here on this call, if you live in New York State, you have an Assembly representative and you have a senator who represents you. The Assembly has more members, and the Assembly representatives have smaller districts, and the Senate has fewer representatives. So for example, you noticed earlier, there are quite a few more Assembly reps from Monroe County than there are senators, because, as I said, the senators cover larger areas. The Democrats are in charge of both houses of the legislature right now. I'll take this chance to, I should have said it earlier, but the Children's Agenda is very independent and nonpartisan. So everything we speak to you tonight is not at all related to any particular party. We work with everyone in order to get things accomplished for children and families in New York State. And you saw that the photo in the photos, Assembly Member Carl Hastie is the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, and Majority Leader or President Andrea Stewart Cousins is the leader of the New York State Senate. And of course, our governor is Kathy Hochul. She's been in the news quite a bit because she just offered her state of the state address. She was just elected to a new 4-year term. And we'll see in just a minute that all the bills that we want to pass that will benefit kids and families must pass the Assembly, they must pass the Senate, and then they must be signed by the governor. Although if she vetoes a bill, it can be overturned by a 2/3 majority. But, and so how a bill becomes a law, every bill has to be introduced by an Assembly person, and then it's given a number. And that number is important because when you're meeting with a legislator, it's really helpful if you have a number for a bill that you are asking them to support, because that makes it very easy for them to look it up. So the bill is introduced, it has to go through a committee process, whether it's in the Senate or the Assembly. Once it gets passed through the committee, it's brought to the full floor. They call it the floor of the Senate or the Assembly, and that's where all of those representatives can vote on that bill. If it passes both houses of the legislature, if it passes through the Assembly and through the Senate, then it is sent to the governor, and she has the choice to either sign it or to veto it. And just to give you a flavor, I think the last year there was about 850 bills that were passed by the Senate and the Assembly. Just to give you a sense of the volume, there's a really tremendous number of bills that pass every year. She does not sign them all, but there are hundreds of bills that are considered. Okay, next slide. And I will hand it over to Eamon Scanlon, our Education Policy Director.
Thanks, Bridget. So I'm going to talk a little bit about targets and tactics. And it's really important when we're doing advocacy campaigns that we have the same language, so we all know what we're talking about. We're all on the same page. And that's just to help us focus our work, because it's a lot of work and there's a lot of moving parts. So when you think about a target in this case, it's really just the person who can give you what you want. And there has to be that person. You can't have an advocacy campaign for something that nobody has the power to give you, because there's nowhere to apply pressure. An example is, world peace cannot be an advocacy campaign because nobody has the power to give us that. But somebody could sign a treaty that ends nuclear weapon proliferation across the globe. There could be specific actors there. So it's important when you're thinking about a target that it is a person. It's not an institution. So we talked a lot about the legislature. But if you're thinking about a target, it's not the legislature as the whole, it's specific elected leaders. So it could be Carl Heastie, it could be Andrea Stewart Cousins. It often is, because they are the two most powerful people in Albany other than the governor. And so that three people, which it used to be in a very chauvinistic way, they used to call it 3 men in a room. Now it's 2 women and a man in a room. Those 3 people really decide what the budget contours, what it looks like as a whole at the very end of the kind of big ugly process. So they are extremely important for budgetary issues, but also for any bill to get to the floor. If it has the support of the leadership, it's much more likely that that's gonna pass. But you want to be specific, so you're going to start maybe with certain people. So if we're talking about a health-related bill, we're going to look at the health committee. We're going to see, if it's mental health, there is a mental health committee, for instance, in the Senate, and the chair of that is actually our local legislator, Brooke. She's the chair, so she's a prime target for anything about mental health, because those bills will go through her committee. And then other members within that committee can be targets. But once you have sort of gotten the universe of the votes that you need, you're going to start having meetings. We're going to talk about that with folks to get a sense of where they are. And when you know where people are, it's a lot easier to focus. Then you can go, okay, now it's really these 2 or 3 assembly members or state senators that we need to put pressure on and change those votes. And that's how we get it through committee or get it to the floor. Next slide. So, but how do we pressure targets? And that's really the name of the game. So the next word is tactics, and tactics are really ways of focusing pressure and power at our targets. So just to review, a goal or an issue is that specific thing that someone can give you. It could be money, it could be a policy change that improves people's lives. The target is the person who can give you that, who has the power to make that decision. And then the tactic is how you're going to put pressure on the target. And it's a very, specific time-bound plan that you have to come up with. And there's a lot of common things that we're going to talk about that you can do. But when you're thinking of tactics, first off, I always want to say they should be fun. And I say that because tactics can be a lot of work. Going to Albany is a lot of work. It's a huge endeavor. And so for us to build power and to keep coming back, we have to enjoy doing it. Advocacy is not drudgery. It should be celebratory. It should be empowering. And that's another piece of this, giving you a sense of your own power. We don't want one or two people doing all the talking, right? It's about the community coming together, everybody getting an opportunity to speak directly to elected leaders, to speak to the media, to take ownership of different parts of organizing the day. So we really want to create that collective sense of power. And we always want to be building. If we're not building, we're dying. We have to have as many folks, as many numbers as we can get. And our tactics should be a way to attract new people. It shouldn't just be insular. It should be, how can I bring other people, get their attention, involve others? And crucially, and you can never say this enough, it has to put pressure on the target. You have to name the target. You have to be in their backyard. They have to feel this. Just doing kind of an awareness event about an issue isn't really as powerful as calling out specifically the decision maker of whether or not they support it. We can have a big rally about mental health, but if we don't have a rally that calls out the governor or a specific committee member who is a crucial vote, that's a wasted opportunity because they're not going to feel the responsibility and the pressure to do anything. So it's got to be directed at your target. And our tactics need to build over time. Pressure has to build. If we start at 100 and then we come down from that, we seem less and less scary to the people we're trying to put pressure on. So it's okay to start with something as simple as a petition signed by 10 people to a huge rally of hundreds of people in Albany months later. You're always building that power, building that pressure. All right, next slide. And there's a lot of common ways that you can apply pressure and build that base. So, we do postcard campaigns. Sign-on letters are a very good tool of showing that everybody's on the same page on a particular issue and what they want. Having op-eds or letters to the editor is a way to get more media coverage for a position, and again, to call out specific targets in the media. Press conferences are another way to get media. And rallies are always just sort of the most fun, right? It has to be fun. That's a way to involve a lot of people, create great visuals, and go to people's backyard, go to Albany, go to people's offices, make a big ruckus and show support for a particular issue. Next slide. And so this, I believe is my last slide, is just, when you're meeting with a legislator, and we're going to be going to Albany a few times this month and next month, to apply that pressure, there's common things that legislators will do, elected leaders will do to avoid responsibility or be a little slippery. And you have to be very careful because it's a lot of time and energy you put into this, getting this meeting, bringing these people together. So there's some things you want to get out of it. The first thing is you have to nail the people down that you're meeting with for yes or no answers. I don't know how many times a legislator does not answer a question and people get nervous in that meeting and nobody pressures and says, well, wait, yes or no. But the whole point of the meeting is to get that answer. And it's important. A no is just as helpful as a yes, because it focuses your energy of like, okay, this is a person I need to put pressure on or not. You need to know where folks stand. So you really got to nail them down. And you always need to get some commitment to move that meeting forward, have fallbacks. It's not just full support of the bill. And if they are supportive of the bill that you're pushing, well, what's the next thing they can do? Can they write a letter to the editor? Can they get their colleagues to sign on as co-sponsors? How are you using folks beyond just one particular ask? And so what are some of these tricks that they'll use in the meeting? So you come out going, well, wait a minute, what was that all about? The first thing is I like to call the know-it-all, or the follow the bouncing bunny, is they will bring up something that you have no idea what they're talking about, that is completely unrelated to the topic at hand, or is just very, very hard to understand. So say, well, didn't, we already doing this bill in the Senate, A6432, and, that would be it would be S3462 or something like that. And it does do that, but you need a different rate, and the reimbursements aren't quite the same, and you have to go through Medicaid. And so suddenly you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they do that intentionally. And they do that intentionally because when you feel overwhelmed by the facts that they're throwing at you, you immediately defer and you go, okay, you're the expert, so I need to learn from you. And they've flipped it from, I'm here to tell you what you need to do, and they're telling you what you need. They're flipping it on, now it's what I have to figure out. So a way to get back from that, the sort of getting distracted by a bunch of details, you're never going to be the complete expert. We bill ourselves as experts. We're never going to know as much about the inner workings of Albany as the elected leaders themselves. They just have that. So we got to talk about what we're there to talk about and say, that's really interesting. Send us that information, but we're here to talk about this bill and whether or not you support this, right? You got to bring it back to why you're there. The second thing that folks do, much more common, is just talk. They will talk and they will talk and they will eat up that meeting time, because the more that the legislator talks, the less time you have to ask them to do anything, to get a commitment. And most people, as we're going to practice in a second, are afraid to interrupt. And so you'll listen and they'll tell you about their day, and they'll tell you about this great thing they did in Florida, and it's just all over the place. And you never really get to the bill you want to talk about, the stories you want to share, the statistics. So you have to be willing to say, that's really interesting, but we're here to talk about this. You have to be able to interrupt and get your points in. Another common thing is to say they're running late. This is just a way to fluster you and make you get off your agenda and be like, okay, wait, what's most important? Stick to what you came there to do. Don't feel rushed. Don't fall for sort of the pressure tactics that they'll use. And then not my job. So very common for elected leaders to deflect responsibility, right? It's, if you talk to the city, of Rochester, they'll blame everything on the school board. Maybe vice versa. If you talk to, folks at the state, they'll blame elected leaders, local elected leaders. Local folks will blame state folks. It's nobody's fault, right? It's always somebody else. It's always some other entity of government that's wrong. It's the Senate versus the Assembly. So what you do to get around that is, well, we're here to talk about how you can help us. What's your support for this issue? What are you going to do? Like, I understand, I agree, we really want the governor on board, but what are you, Assembly member, going to do to help me pass this bill, right? So you got to bring the focus back to them. And then last thing, trust is worth about nothing in Albany. You really need commitments. You need things, pieces of paper, things you can take home. So when a legislator says, I'm with you, I trust you, it's like, that's great. So what are you going to do? What are the specific things? What are the commitments? Writing stuff in the press is a very clear indication of support. Signing a pledge. You need to get specific, and you need publicly viewable ways that legislators support things. It can't just be an insider conversation. That's not worth anything. All right, so those are my little spiel, and we'll have some of these tips for you to use in the future, but this is just kind of an overview. So.